The first deadly strike against American forces in the Middle East since the October 7th attacks is adding fuel to the fire in what is already an incredibly tense situation across the region. President Biden has vowed to retaliate against a drone attack on a U.S. base in Jordan that killed 3 service members and injured dozens. Here's what we know about the attack. You can see it in the middle of your screen. It took place at a logistics base where 350 Army and Air Force personnel are deployed as part of the effort to prevent the resurgence of ISIS. The Pentagon reporting in just the last hour, all 3 killed were members of the Army Reserve. They are 46-year-old Sergeant William Jerome Rivers, Specialist Kennedy L. Sanders, 24 years old, from Georgia, and 23-year-old Specialist Brianna Moffett, also from Georgia. A drone struck the living quarters of the base where some of the troops were sleeping. 8 of the injured had to be evacuated out of Jordan because of the severity of their injuries. That's according to U.S. Central Command. An umbrella group of Iranian-backed militias known as the Islamic Resistance in Iraq has claimed responsibility, and there's brand new reporting on what went wrong. The New York Times reports air defenses failed to stop a deadly attack on a U.S. military outpost in Jordan on Sunday because the hostile drone homed in on its target at the same time an American drone was returning to the base, 2 U.S. officials said on Monday. The return of the American surveillance drone to the remote resupply base prompted some confusion over whether the incoming drone was friendly or not, and air defenses were not immediately activated. The deaths on Sunday significantly ups the stakes in what has been a slow-boil conflict between Iranian-backed groups and the United States across the region. There have been more than 170 attacks on U.S. bases, mostly in Syria and Iraq, since war erupted in Gaza. And the U.S. has been responding, carrying out dozens of retaliatory strikes in the region. Not to mention that the U.S. has been bombing the Houthi militia in Yemen for blocking the vital shipping routes in the nearby Red Sea. The Washington Post adds this, driving home the complexity of the multi-front conflict. More cross-border strikes were reported in the region Monday morning. Iraqi militias claim to have targeted Israel, while Iran and Syria accused Israel of striking in Damascus, end quote. Now, what has been a delicate balancing act for the United States has become more complicated, with the entire region waiting to see what the United States response looks like and if it includes strikes against Iran itself. Here's what the National Security Council spokesman John Kirby had to say about that.
No question there's going to be a response, and you heard that from the president yesterday. We will respond. But as we've done in the past, we're going to do it in a time and a manner of our choosing. We'll be careful. We'll be deliberate about this, and the president will make the right decisions at the right time. We're certainly not going to telegraph punches to the Iranians or to these groups that they're backing.
And that's where we start today with the former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, Ben Rhodes, plus former United States Senator and co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, Claire McCaskill, and Senior Fellow and Director of Global Engagement at the American University of Beirut, Rami Khouri. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for kicking us off this afternoon. Ben, at some point, we have to stop warning everybody that this is going to escalate into a regional conflict. It's already escalating into a regional conflict. I think the question here is whether or not America and Iran are going to get into a direct conflict.
Yeah, I mean, Ali, we've been in a regional conflict for weeks, if not months already. And obviously the heart of that conflict since October 7th has been in Gaza. But we've seen violence and exchanges of tit for tat, fire and strikes in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, in Jordan now. And so this, make no mistake, is already a conflagration across the region. I think you're making the core point here, which is that this has essentially been a series of groups that some of which are proxies for Iran, some of which get support from Iran, but are not controlled by Iran, like the Houthis. I think we can overstate that. Confrontations between them and Israel and the United States. And I think the key decision point for the United States is, as it considers a response to this, does it go after Iranian targets in Iran? The IRGC that supports some of these proxy groups? Do we go after them inside of Iran? Do we go after kind of their bases or nodes in some of these other places like Iraq and Syria? Or do we go after just these groups themselves, just the proxy groups themselves? I would err a note of caution here. I feel like we're on an escalatory path here, a tit for tat that just keeps escalating without a clear sense of where this is all going. And the last thing we want is to kind of be pulled into a regional war by groups that want us there. These groups are not looking to be deterred. These groups are looking to draw the United States into this war. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be. You have to hold open some space here for diplomacy and de-escalation, or else risk a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy where you're getting drawn into a quicksand in this region without a very clear sense of where is this all going. So yes, I understand the absolute need to defend and protect U.S. service members, but the deterrent value of some of these U.S. actions in response are not clear to me, because some of these groups, the Houthis in particular, for instance, they're not going to be deterred. They want the conflict that they're trying to provoke with the United States.
Claire McCaskill, I was a little bit surprised with Lindsey Graham, although I guess I shouldn't be surprised with Lindsey Graham, just because he's a man who does know about the world and about foreign affairs. He tweeted, the best response the Biden administration could have to Iran's BS denial of involvement in the attack that killed and wounded U.S. service members is to target Iranian oil or IRGC military infrastructure valuable to the regime. Anything less will be seen as weakness and will put more Americans in harm's way. The president has all the authority he needs to act. He must now. And by the way, that's one of the more measured responses from some members of the Republican part of the side of the Senate. This is a super, as Ben says, a super complex issue. Attack on Iran needs to be very well thought out if that's the kind of thing that's going to happen.
Well, and I think we have to be, really aware that there's political connotations going on here, too. There's a price to pay when our country is divided around national defense. And right now, I mean, you just cited Lindsey Graham. There's a huge split in the Republican Party. I mean, none other than, wacko Tucker Carlson went after Lindsey Graham for saying that we should respond. So you have a group of Republicans that are Trump loyalists that do not want us to fight to help Ukraine, do not want us to counter Putin, are just fine with Trump being best friends with all the bad guys in the world. They want us out of any military entanglement. And then you've got people on the Armed Services Committee, both Republicans and Democrats, that understand that this needs to be thoughtful, that we need to be cautious, and we can't give these militia groups Iranian back, but we can't give them what they want. They want us in this, and part of it may be that the bad guys in the world would love to cause Biden political problems right now.
Rami, let's talk about what's going on in Iran. Iran seems to have made a decision at the moment that it's not looking for a direct confrontation with the United States, but it uses those groups that are friendly to them, or those groups that are friendly to them are engaged in these things. There are some strange bedfellows involved here. This hasn't become the Third World War that some people thought it would be, but it is spreading.
Yeah, it's been spreading since the early 1980s. If you look at what's Hezbollah in Lebanon and the American Marines embassy that was bombed in Lebanon. And this is not something that just started on October 7 or when the base in Jordan was set up. This is a long-running problem, confrontation between the United States and Israel on one side, England, and now the UK is involved, and several parties on the other side. What's striking here, and here's where the only time in my life I disagreed with Ben. I don't think they want the Islamist groups want the Americans here. They have expressly been saying for years they're trying to drive the Americans out of the region. That's not going to happen probably, but I think what they'd like is a fewer bases than the Americans now have, which is something I think they have around 35 or 40 military bases all around the region. And people wonder, what are these bases for? Are they protecting Americans, or are they helping Israel, or are they helping allies of the U.S.? What are they doing? The reality is that this group that Iran has put together, Hezbollah, Hamas, Ansarullah in Yemen, and the various smaller groups in Iraq and Syria, who are now the main instruments of attacking small attacks against U.S. bases in Syria and Jordan. This axis of resistance, as they call it, has proved to be the strongest military force in the region, in the Arab region at least. Turkey is stronger, Iran may be stronger, and they're all non-state actors. This is quite extraordinary. So I think the policymakers in Washington need to step back a little bit, take a broader look at the region, look back 30, 40 years, look back maybe a little bit longer, and see, is this American policy of focusing on military force, attacking countries, threatening countries, and sanctioning people and countries, is it producing the results we want, or is it dragging the U.S. into more and more of these conflicts? And if you look at the ones where the U.S. went in and forced, Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Lebanon, none of them ended well. And these smaller groups that are being created now, indigenously or with Iran, they all really came out of the chaos that happened in Iraq and Syria to a large extent, after the American-led invasion to get rid of Saddam Hussein on false pretenses. So I think we need a much larger, more sophisticated analysis of just keeping our, keeping our honor and hitting them back when they hit us. The United States has to be more humble and more precise in how it uses military power effectively, which it has in some cases. The battle against ISIS, I think, was legitimate. The battle to get the Iraqis out of Kuwait was legitimate. But many of these other military presences are not seen to be legitimate in the eyes of local people. And the Islamist groups are all saying, don't threaten us. We're not scared of what you're threatening us with. Look at the Ansarullah and the Houthis in Yemen. And they're all saying we want to get the United States out of the region, not to pull it in.